Hello and welcome back to episode 4 of the Nostalgic Futurist. In this episode, I will be discussing the feelings of nostalgia that places like Disneyland invoke in us and why they're so effective. There are many types of nostalgia that we feel in Disneyland. There's the nostalgia for the Disneyland of your past, the Disneyland of the actual past, and of course, a nostalgia for a time period that you didn't even exist in. A nostalgia for the turn of the century on Main Street, or the Wild West in Frontierland. These are time periods that we, of course, did not live through, but yet we still feel as if it's a part of our history that we miss. Let's start with why nostalgia is so built into Disneyland. It all began with Walt Disney, and Walt Disney was an extremely nostalgic person while also still looking towards the future. He really missed the days of his childhood growing up around the turn of the century with horse-drawn buggies next to fast-moving cars and steam trains, bunting on the buildings and getting to go to the general store. Things like that are what he wanted to incorporate into Main Street USA. And by doing so, he created nostalgia for the rest of us that's based off of his own nostalgia for his own past. But why does it work? In much the same way that we love movies about the past, we love watching Jane Austen-era films about romance, or watching swashbuckling pirates in Pirates of the Caribbean. These time periods are not exactly familiar to us, but we know so much about them because we've seen them so frequently that they feel like they're a part of our past, and that's why we grow so attached to them. And Disneyland does all of these things very effectively. It hits all the most stereotypical favorite time periods for nostalgia. The turn of the century on Main Street, the Wild West on Frontierland. Even things like Fantasyland hit us in a place that hits home. Our childhoods were brought up around fairy tales and mythical places, and Fantasyland plays right into all of those things. I would even say there's a nostalgia about Tomorrowland, a nostalgia for the 60s, the 80s. All these places play right into our nostalgia. But was Walt planning to do this while he built the park? Or was he just acting out his fantasies, his nostalgia, and his longing for a time that was no longer with us? As an avid Disney Parks fan, I've always been obsessed with my own nostalgia for the park back in the 50s, 60s, even the 70s and the 80s. I love watching old footage and finding old photographs of just like the different setup of Fantasyland or how different the rides were back then. I wish there was a way I could go back and enjoy a Disneyland of 1955 or a Disneyland of 1967. And for me, a lot of my nostalgia is played out through a Disneyland that I never even got to experience, just like me never experiencing the time period of Main Street USA. But then there's also a nostalgia for the Disneyland of my childhood. I can remember the times before Galaxy's Edge, even before Disney's California Adventure, surprisingly. And along with remembering my childhood Disneyland also comes with the Disneyland that I've lived through my entire life. There's this incessant need, and I'm so guilty of it, to want to keep the park exactly as it is and to not let it change because we love the nostalgia of what this thing is now. I mean, every time that they change Space Mountain to hyperspace, I'm so scared the original Space Mountain's not coming back. And I know eventually I can't have it forever, and Space Mountain's going to become a part of the nostalgia that I have for Tomorrowland. Then there's also the nostalgia we feel for something that's not even real. Star Wars is a fantasy series based in outer space, and yet generations feel such a deep connection to it that I've watched people go gaga as they walk into Galaxy's Edge. I've seen people cry. I've seen people run up to droids, run up to R2-D2 and be like, oh my gosh, I finally get to meet you. And it's so strange because we know it's not real, but we feel a nostalgia. Now, yes, Star Wars does have this super 1970s aspect to it that does make it feel vintage when you watch the original trilogy. But it's more than that. When I first rode Rise of the Resistance and I finally got to really be a part of the Star Wars story, I mean, for the longest time, I've always wanted to be Princess Leia, and it felt like I finally got the chance to be in her story and in her world. I mean, I was crying by the end. I wasn't the only one. There's something about getting to finally live your dreams and get to really experience what it's like to be in a story. And there's a nostalgia that comes with that, even though it's happening in real time. Or take Cars Land, a land literally built on nostalgia. Cars, at least the first one, is about what happens when we try to bypass the old life. We try to make bigger, better, faster freeways and cities, and we forget about the old little neon-signed towns right off of Route 66. This plays into one of the more interesting things that's happening with this virus that's keeping us all inside. It's actually forcing us to slow down and focus on the things in life that we used to have time to, but now we have cell phones and TV and fast cars, and we don't think about those things so much. But suddenly people are actually having time to spend with family, or getting to finally work on that hobby they always wanted to get good at, or check in with friends that they just haven't seen in forever and finally have the time to give them a phone call or a Zoom call. And that's something that Disneyland really touches on, is this idea of bringing people together, of almost slowing us down a little bit. While your day does feel fast-paced, how do you feel when it gets to be around 9 p.m., 10 p.m. in the park? You start to realize that you're not going to get to do everything that you planned, and it's okay. You're so excited to get to go do the few things you have left, to go walk through the hub, maybe pause, take a picture of the castle, and just enjoy its lights. Things like this are what make Disneyland so nostalgic. And it's why so many of us who are sheltering in place and who are stuck without Disneyland, Disney World, or any of the parks overseas, we're all making content. We're listening to the soundtracks of the fireworks. We're watching ride-through videos or news sources to try and find out anything we can about when the parks will come back. And while the parks may seem like something small and simple and not very important, there is something about it. It's something that makes people happy, it makes people entertained, and it helps you just get through sometimes the hardest parts of life. I hope soon we will all be able to return to our home park, or maybe a park we had scheduled a vacation for and didn't get to go on. I know that things are rough and hard, and it's not the easiest thing to stay in one place and be stuck inside all the time. But Disneyland is still there for us, and it will be very soon. We don't know how soon, but when we get to walk back through those gates again, all the nostalgia that we're feeling for Disneyland right now will be sated, and we will get to walk down our favorite nostalgic streets and enjoy a Dole Whip or a churro or any of the other snacks that we love. And we'll just get to finally feel at peace. And trust me, it's worth the wait. Thank you for joining me for this rather short episode of The Nostalgic Futurist. While things are not always the easiest right now, I just needed to talk a little bit about those feelings that we're all feeling about not being able to go to Disneyland right now. And it's kind of hard to talk about. It seems so trivial in the world where so many bad things are happening, but it just feels so weird to know that Disneyland, for the first time in its entire history, has not been open for weeks. And as somebody who desires to have Disneyland in their life, just to feel a sense of happiness and nostalgia, it's been hard. And I know it's been difficult for others too. And I really hope we get our parks back soon. Stay healthy and stay safe out there. I'll see you next week.